remember standing in the kitchen with the lights still off, the hum of the refrigerator louder than it had ever been, staring at something that made my hands go cold. The house smelled like stale coffee and rain drifting in through a cracked window, and for a moment I felt like I was looking at someone else's life instead of my own. Nothing had exploded yet, but I knew, deep in my chest, that something irreversible had just happened. If you're listening to this and you've ever felt that quiet drop in your stomach when trust starts to slip, subscribe and tell me where you're listening from, because stories like this rarely look dramatic at first. What scared me wasn't anger or heartbreak. It was how calm everything looked while something was being taken from me without my permission. I stood there realizing the danger wasn't loud. It was careful, patient, and already in motion. That was the moment everything began to unravel. I did not discover my marriage was breaking because of lipstick on a collar or a late-night message. I discovered it through something so ordinary that it took my breath away. I was 38 years old, standing still in my own house, feeling a quiet shift that I could not explain but could not ignore. There is a moment when your body knows the truth before your mind is ready to catch up. For me, it felt like the air had thinned. Nothing dramatic had happened. No shouting, no obvious betrayal, just a sudden heavy awareness that something inside my life had moved out of alignment. My name is Emily Carter, and until that moment, I believed I was married to a man who valued calm, structure, and honesty as much as I did. From the outside, everything looked steady. Our home was quiet. Our routines were solid. Our life appeared untouched by chaos. But inside me, something had gone cold. What unsettled me most was not what I saw, but what I felt. A soft internal warning that whispered this was not about love fading or temptation creeping in. This was something more deliberate, more careful, almost invisible. I remember standing there, realizing that whatever I was about to uncover would not explode all at once. It would unfold slowly, through details I once trusted without question, and before I knew it, I would be looking back at our calm routines, understanding they were never as safe as I believed. For most of my marriage, safety did not come from grand gestures. It came from repetition, from knowing what each day would look like before it arrived. Daniel and I built our life out of small, dependable habits, and for a long time, that felt like love in its most reliable form. We woke up at the same time every morning. Coffee brewed while the house was still quiet, the sound familiar enough that it barely registered anymore. Weekdays moved on schedule. Evenings were predictable. Dinner at the table, television on low, conversations that didn't need effort because we already knew the answers. Weekends followed their own rhythm. Groceries, laundry, a walk around the neighborhood if the weather cooperated. Nothing exciting, nothing alarming, just steady. That steadiness made me relax in ways I didn't realize at the time. It made me stop looking too closely. When your life runs on routine, you begin to believe routine itself is proof that everything is fine. Our home felt calm. Our conversations felt easy. I trusted the silence between us because it had never betrayed me before. I remember how the light used to fall through our living room windows in the late afternoon, soft and warm, catching on the furniture we picked together, the walls we painted together. It felt like evidence that we were settled, that we had done something right. Looking back, I can see how much comfort I took in that predictability, how it lowered my guard without me noticing. I thought stability meant security. I thought routine meant honesty. What I didn't understand then was that routines can keep you from seeing what's changing underneath them. And slowly, without any single moment to point to, something began to feel slightly off. Nothing I could name yet, just small shifts that didn't belong. quietly waiting for me to notice. At first, nothing actually changed, or at least that's what I told myself. The routines were still there, the schedule still held, but inside those familiar patterns, small things began to feel slightly misplaced, like furniture moved an inch to the left, easy to ignore, hard to explain. Daniel started keeping his phone closer. It used to sit anywhere, forgotten on the counter, tossed on the couch, left charging in plain sight. Now it stayed within reach, face down, always accounted for. When it buzzed, his attention sharpened in a way I hadn't seen before. Not panic, not guilt, just focus, like someone making sure nothing slipped. Our conversations grew thinner, not colder, just lighter. He listened, but not all the way. His mind seemed half a step ahead of the room, already moving on before the moment was finished. He laughed when expected. He nodded at the right times, but there was a slight delay in his presence, like he was visiting instead of living there. I noticed changes in timing, too, leaving earlier, coming home later. Nothing dramatic enough to accuse, nothing concrete enough to question, just enough to register. I told myself this was normal. Work stress, fatigue, the natural ebb and flow of a long marriage. Still, my awareness sharpened. I began to watch instead of relax, to notice instead of assume. I caught myself replaying moments in my head, asking if I was imagining things, if I was becoming suspicious for no reason. I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to invent problems where there were none. So I stayed quiet. I didn't confront. I didn't ask questions that would force answers I wasn't ready to hear. Silence felt safer. Observation felt smarter. I told myself that if something was wrong, it would reveal itself without me pushing. And that was the unsettling part. Once I stopped trying to prove myself wrong, the patterns became harder to dismiss. The gaps added up. The feeling didn't fade. I didn't know what I was waiting for yet. I just knew that if I paid attention long enough, something solid would eventually surface, something I wouldn't be able to explain away. I found the first proof on a quiet morning, doing something I had done 100 times before. I was logged into our joint bank account, paying bills, moving money where it needed to go. Nothing emotional, nothing dramatic, just routine. That's when one line stopped me. It was a small charge, easy to miss if you weren't looking closely. An unfamiliar name. An amount that barely registered. I stared at it longer than I needed to, waiting for recognition to arrive. It didn't. I scrolled back. There it was again. Same name, different date. Another small amount. I kept scrolling. The pattern revealed itself slowly, like a picture coming into focus. Once a week, sometimes a little more. Always subtle. Always quiet. The kind of charge that hides inside a busy account and assumes no one will question it. My body reacted before my thoughts did. A heaviness in my chest. A slow, deliberate breath. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't groceries or gas or a forgotten subscription. It was something intentional, something designed not to draw attention. What unsettled me most was not the money. It was the repetition, the planning behind it. Whatever this was, it had been happening for a while, woven neatly into our shared life without my knowledge. I closed the laptop without calling Daniel. I knew how that conversation would go. There would be an answer ready, smooth, reasonable, just believable enough to quiet me and make me doubt myself. I wasn't ready for that. Silence felt like the right move. Observation had served me well so far. If this charge belonged, it would reveal itself. And if it didn't, rushing would only warn him. I went back to my day carrying the weight of that knowledge, aware that something had shifted. I had crossed from feeling to fact, and almost immediately, the atmosphere around me began to change. within days. His behavior softened in ways that didn't feel natural anymore, and I realized the discovery had not gone unnoticed. The change came quickly, too quickly to feel natural. Within days of that quiet discovery, Daniel softened in ways I hadn't seen in years. He came home earlier. He brought small gifts without explanation. Flowers appeared on the counter, arranged carefully, like they were meant to be noticed. On the surface, it looked like effort, like renewed attention. But something about it felt staged, as if he were following a script instead of responding to me. His warmth didn't reach his eyes. His affection landed gently but without weight, the way politeness does when it's trying to pass for care. I found myself watching instead of receiving, not because I wanted to pull away, but because my instincts wouldn't let me lean in. The timing was wrong. The shift was too precise. This tenderness arrived exactly when I had stopped trusting what I couldn't see. Even the way he moved around the house felt different, more deliberate, more present, but only on the surface. It was as if he were performing closeness rather than living it. I realized how easy it is to mistake attention for honesty when you want things to be fine. Then the conversations shifted, subtly at first. Mentions of finances wrapped in concern, suggestions framed as practicality, a tone that implied protection while quietly pressing for access. Nothing overt enough to refuse outright, but enough to register as strategy rather than partnership. That was when the anger arrived, not explosive, just steady. A quiet recognition that kindness can be used as leverage when someone wants you relaxed, grateful, unguarded. I understood then that this affection wasn't meant to bring us closer. It was meant to soften me, so I responded carefully. I smiled, I accepted, but I did not forget. Emotionally, I stepped back. I stopped offering reassurance. I stopped filling the silence for him. Instead, I paid attention. Because once kindness starts feeling like a tool, the safest thing you can do is stop reacting and start looking. And I was ready to see what he didn't realize he was leaving behind. The morning after his unexpected kindness, Daniel left early. The house settled into silence the way it always did after the garage door closed. I stood there for a moment, listening, letting my body calm before my mind caught up. I didn't plan to investigate that day. I was still moving carefully, still pretending nothing had changed. But as I walked past the home office, something ordinary caught my attention. The printer. We shared it for everything. Work documents, grocery lists, boarding passes. It sat there quietly, forgotten, like furniture. Most people don't realize printers remember. I turned it on, not rushing, not dramatic, just curious. I scrolled through the recent history, expecting nothing specific, prepared to close it and walk away. Then I saw the titles. My breath slowed. Asset worksheet, property breakdown, revised version, dates that went back weeks. Nothing had printed recently, but the machine remembered everything that had passed through it. I stood there, feeling the weight settle in my chest without spilling over. This wasn't stress. This wasn't confusion. This was preparation. The kind that happens quietly, deliberately, while the other person believes they're still living a shared life. I didn't print anything. That would leave a trail. Instead, I took a photo of the screen with my phone, careful to capture the dates and names without touching a single button. Evidence without noise. Truth without warning. When I finished, I powered the printer down and left it exactly as I found it. I walked into the kitchen and made coffee. The smell filled the room. The routine continued. Anyone watching would have seen nothing unusual, but internally, everything had shifted. Up until that moment, I had been a wife noticing cracks, standing there, coffee warming my hands. I understood I was no longer just observing, I was documenting, measuring, protecting myself. Whatever Daniel was doing, it wasn't accidental. It was organized, and if he believed he was moving quietly, he was wrong. The machine had remembered, and now, so would I. I saw him when I wasn't supposed to. I was walking through downtown in the early afternoon, running an errand he knew nothing about, when I noticed a familiar posture under a cafe awning across the street. At first, my brain rejected it. He had told me he was across town, tied up in meetings, but there he was. Daniel. Phone pressed to his ear, pacing with purpose. I stopped without thinking, half hidden by a concrete pillar. My body still before my thoughts caught up. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. His voice carried just enough. Not words I could repeat, but intention I could feel. Urgency. Pressure. Timing. Whatever he was discussing, it wasn't casual. It wasn't personal. It sounded procedural, like steps being checked off, like something with a deadline. I watched his face tighten, then relax into something practiced. He nodded to no one, listening more than speaking, as if being guided. When he ended the call, he didn't look relieved. He looked focused, committed. That was the moment everything recalibrated. This wasn't a man confused about his marriage. This wasn't emotional drift or poor communication. This was coordination, the kind that involves planning, external input, and a clear objective. The strange charges, the sudden affection, the documents sitting quietly in the printer's memory. None of it was random anymore. I stayed where I was until he walked away, my heart steady in a way that surprised me. Fear didn't spike. Anger didn't explode. What I felt was clarity, cold and sharp. As I walked back to my car, every strange moment from the past weeks reorganized itself. The story I had been telling myself collapsed, replaced by one far more unsettling, but far more accurate. I wasn't reacting to chaos. I was standing inside someone else's plan, and now that I could see its outline, I knew exactly what I needed to find next. I found the document late at night, when the house had gone quiet and Daniel was asleep beside me. His laptop was still open on the nightstand, the screen dim but active, like it was waiting to be noticed. I told myself I was only going to close it. I didn't intend to search, but something pulled my hand forward anyway. I moved slowly, deliberately. I searched by date first, then by folder. That's when I saw it. A file buried beneath neutral names, written in language that tried to sound gentle, reasonable, almost caring. But the meaning was unmistakable. It wasn't a plan to fix our marriage. It wasn't counseling notes or a shared budget. It was a legal document designed to strip me down quietly, a framework that would leave him protected and me exposed, assets redefined, rights narrowed, my contributions minimized into footnotes. I felt the weight of it settle in my body, not as panic, but as gravity. This wasn't impulsive. It had been revised, updated, thought through. He had been preparing while I was still trusting the silence between us. In that moment, the entire past few months reorganized themselves. The sudden affection, the conversations about finances framed as concern, the printer history, the phone calls. This document wasn't a reaction. It was the destination. What hurt most wasn't the money. It was the realization that he had been planning to erase me while still sleeping next to me every night. That he believed love could be rewritten into clauses if I wasn't paying attention. I didn't wake him. I didn't react. I took photos of every page, careful to leave no trace. Then I closed the laptop and lay back down, my breathing steady, my mind already shifting. Uncertainty was gone. Doubt was finished. I understood now that this wasn't about betrayal in the emotional sense. It was about control, once you see that clearly, you stop hoping for honesty and start preparing for survival. By morning, I knew I couldn't do this alone. And I knew exactly what my next step had to be. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not friends, not family. I needed someone who would see this clearly, without emotion blurring the edges. That's how I ended up sitting in a quiet office a few days later, surrounded by shelves of thick books and the steady hum of professionalism. The lawyer listened without interrupting. I laid everything out in order: the charges, the printer history, the document I found in the middle of the night. I expected surprise, maybe disbelief. What I got instead was recognition. As I watched her face, something shifted. There was no shock there, just confirmation. The kind that lands heavily because it means you're not imagining things. This wasn't paranoia. It wasn't fear talking. What I had uncovered was real, and it was already in motion. She explained what the document meant in practical terms, how timing mattered, how delay could cost me everything I had built before the marriage, how once certain legal steps were taken, control could quietly disappear if I didn't move first. I hesitated, not because I didn't understand, but because protecting myself felt uncomfortably close to betrayal. I had been conditioned to believe loyalty meant transparency, even when transparency could be used against you. Sitting there, I realized how dangerous that belief can be. Taking action didn't feel dramatic. It felt surgical. We moved my premarital assets into a separate structure that same day. Clean, legal, protected. A line drawn quietly, without confrontation or announcement. Walking out of that office, I felt different, not lighter, stronger. The fear hadn't vanished, but it no longer controlled the direction of my thoughts. Knowledge had replaced panic. Preparation had replaced waiting. For the first time since this began, I wasn't reacting. I was choosing. And before I let myself breathe too easily, I knew I needed to answer one more question. Not what he was planning, but how closely he was watching me while he did it. Once the legal protections were in place, I needed to know one thing for certain, not what Daniel was planning, but how closely he was watching me while he did it. Guesswork wasn't enough anymore. I needed proof. So I set a trap. I opened a new account under my own name and moved a small, meaningless amount into it. Nothing that mattered, nothing I would miss. I left the information visible, right where he would expect to see it. I didn't hide it. I didn't guard it. I let it exist like an invitation. Then I waited. The waiting was the hardest part, not because I was anxious, but because I had to act normal while my awareness stayed sharp. Every sound in the house registered. Every glance felt louder. I went about my day as if nothing had changed, even though internally I was counting minutes. The confirmation came faster than I expected. My phone buzzed with a security alert, a failed login attempt, then another, and another. Each notification landed quietly, but together they spoke clearly. Someone was trying to get in, someone who believed they already had the right. I didn't feel fear when it happened. I felt relief, the kind that comes when doubt finally dissolves. I wasn't imagining this. I wasn't overreacting. He was actively monitoring me, tracking access, testing boundaries. In that moment, the balance shifted. I wasn't being hunted anymore. I was observing the hunt from the outside, calm, documenting, in control. He thought he was moving unseen, that I was still passive, still trusting. What he didn't realize was that every move he made now was visible to me, and people who believe they're hidden tend to make mistakes. I let him keep believing that, because once someone shows you exactly who they are, patience becomes power. And I could feel that power settling in, steady and certain. as he began to move faster than his plan could support. Once I stopped giving him access, Daniel stopped pretending to be patient. The shift was subtle at first, but unmistakable. He moved faster, pressed harder. The careful pacing I had seen before disappeared, replaced by urgency that leaked through everything he did. Requests came with tighter timelines. Documents appeared that needed immediate attention. His calm confidence began to fray around the edges. I watched it happen without reacting. There were attempts to push papers across the table framed as routine updates, things he expected me to sign quickly, without reading. There were sudden conversations about refinancing, about restructuring, about making things easier for both of us if we acted now. Each move felt rushed, as if he sensed something slipping and needed to grab it before it was gone. Behind the scenes, he escalated further. Emergency filings, claims that painted him as concerned and me as unstable. A strategy meant to freeze everything in place before I could move again. What he didn't know was that he was already too late. Because the protections were in place before he made his move, every attempt he launched hit a wall he couldn't see. Accounts he thought were within reach were no longer accessible. Assets he assumed were shared had already been secured. The timing that was supposed to trap me instead exposed him. I didn't feel the urge to confront him. I didn't need to. The facts spoke clearly enough. Each rushed action only confirmed what I already knew. He believed pressure would force compliance, because it always had before. This time, it didn't. When the legal notifications came, they weren't frightening. They were clarifying. They showed exactly how far he was willing to go once control slipped from his hands, and they showed just as clearly that preparation had changed the outcome. Sitting with that knowledge, I felt something loosen inside me. Not relief. Resolution. He thought he was closing the net. In reality, he had stepped fully into it himself. From that point on, there was nothing left for me to do but walk forward. The ending was already written, and for the first time in a long while, it wasn't one he controlled. The ending didn't arrive with raised voices or dramatic speeches. It came quietly, on paper, through signatures and dates that closed one chapter and sealed another. By the time everything was finalized, Daniel looked smaller to me. Not defeated, just revealed. The man I once trusted was replaced by someone I understood clearly now, without confusion or nostalgia blurring the edges. That clarity made anger unnecessary. It also made goodbye simple. The resolution itself was straightforward. What mattered to me was protected. My work stayed mine. My finances remained intact. My independence was no longer something I had to defend in private. I didn't win anything that wasn't already mine to begin with, and that distinction mattered more than I expected. I didn't ask him for explanations. I didn't offer forgiveness or demand remorse. I chose not to confront him one last time. Not because I was afraid, but because I didn't need anything from him anymore. Closure didn't require his participation. There were losses, of course. The future I thought I was building disappeared. Certain memories had to be refiled under truth instead of hope. But what stayed with me was stronger than what fell away. I kept my name, my stability, my sense of direction, and the quiet knowledge that I trusted myself when it mattered. Walking away felt less like escape and more like completion. I wasn't running from the past. I was stepping forward without it. As I closed that door, I felt an unfamiliar stillness settle in. Not emptiness, peace. And with that peace came the understanding that this story didn't end in survival alone, but in wholeness. What this experience taught me is that strength does not always look loud or dramatic. Sometimes it looks like silence, like patience, like trusting the quiet voice inside you when everything around you tells you to stay comfortable and not ask questions. I used to believe that keeping the peace meant keeping myself small. Now I understand that calm observation, boundaries, and self-respect are not weakness. They are forms of protection. They are how we honor ourselves when no one else is watching. If any part of this story feels familiar, I want you to know you are not imagining things. You are not overreacting, and you are not alone. Awareness does not mean you have to act immediately, but it does mean you deserve to listen to yourself without guilt or fear. I'm grateful that you stayed with me through this story. Sharing it was not easy, but it matters to know these experiences resonate beyond one life, one marriage, one moment. There is comfort in realizing that our stories connect in ways we do not always expect. Thank you for listening and for holding space for this truth. If you feel comfortable, I would love to hear your thoughts or your own experiences in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if this story helped you feel seen, consider staying connected. Sometimes, healing begins simply by being heard.